Tombstone, Arizona Territory, June 1882. The day was hot enough to buckle iron, but the heat in the town square didn't come from the sun. It came from the crowd gathered around the platform, their voices a low murmur of greed and gossip. Sam Morrison had been passing through, aiming for a quiet drink and maybe a game of cards before heading north. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never was. Then he saw the boy, small for his age, maybe 12, maybe 13, hair dusty blonde and eyes like storm clouds over dry plains. His shirt was torn, his wrists bound in rough rope. The auctioneer's voice rolled over the square like a whip crack. "Debt property of the late Jonathan Harper. Strong back, good with chores. Starting bid, $10. Sam slowed, boots grinding in the dirt. He'd seen plenty of cruel sights in his drifting years, but a child on the auction block was something that still twisted his gut. He scanned the crowd. Most folks looked away, pretending they weren't part of it. A few leaned forward, eyes calculating the worth of small, calloused hands. The bidding began. $10, $11, $12. Then Sam heard someone near the back mutter, "Pity he's got Morrison eyes." Sam turned, slow and deliberate. "What did you say?" The man shrugged. "Just that he's got the look of that family. You know, the one that used to have that ranch out near Silver Creek before the daughter ran off." A flicker of memory slammed into Sam's chest. His sister Anna, laughing in the wheat fields before the war. Her letters had stopped coming years ago. Then word came she died of fever in some nowhere town. No mention of a child, no mention at all. He looked back at the boy. Those eyes, Morrison eyes. The auctioneer's gavel was about to fall at $15 when Sam's voice cut through the heat. 50. The square went quiet. Heads turned. 50 was more than the boy would fetch by any logic but Sam's. The auctioneer blinked. "Sold!" Sam stepped forward, dropping coins into the man's sweaty palm. He cut the rope from the boy's wrists with his pocket knife. Up close, the boy's gaze was fierce, guarded. "What's your name, son?" Sam asked. The boy hesitated, then said, "Ethan." "Ethan what?" Another pause. Then, "Ethan Harper." Sam crouched slightly, voice low so only the boy could hear. "You ever hear of Anna Morrison?" The boy's eyes changed, a flicker of recognition, confusion, and something deeper. She was my mother." The noise of the crowd faded in Sam's ears. The hot dust, the smell of horses, the sharp creak of the platform boards under his boots, all of it blurred until there was only this boy, this truth, and the sudden weight of a promise he had no choice but to make. "You're coming with me," Sam said. From the other side of the square, a tall man in a fine vest watched them with a wolf's smile. A smile that promised this wasn't over. Sam hadn't made it 5 steps from the auction block before the man with the wolf's smile started toward them, his fine vest unbuttoned just enough to show the glint of a watch chain and the butt of a pistol at his hip. He moved like someone who'd already decided the outcome, eyes fixed on Ethan in a way that made Sam's hand twitch toward his coat. "That's my nephew," the man said, loud enough for the lingering crowd to hear, "and you've got no right to him." The name rolled off his tongue with smug satisfaction. Richard Harper, Jonathan Harper's brother, Ethan's blood uncle by law, if not by heart. He claimed Ethan was his responsibility now that Anna was gone, that debts tied to Jonathan had to be settled in family hands, and that Sam was a stranger meddling where he had no standing. Sam met his gaze without blinking. feeling the pieces slam together in his mind. Ethan's sale wasn't about clearing debt. It was about Richard getting the boy under his roof for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness. The way Richard's eyes measured Ethan made Sam's gut clench. This was about control, maybe about the Morrison ranch Anna had inherited before she died, a piece of land Sam hadn't set foot on in years, but suddenly felt in his bones again. "You want the boy?" Sam said, stepping closer. "You'll have to come through me." Richard's smile widened just a fraction, the kind of smile that says a man is already planning how to win without firing the first shot. And with that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving in his wake a promise of pursuit as certain as the desert sun. The dust from Richard's boots was still settling when Ethan's small fingers dug into Sam's sleeve, a silent plea that carried more weight than any words could. Sam led him toward the livery, the sounds of the street dimming under the rush of his own thoughts. He could feel Richard's eyes on their backs even after they turned the corner, like the man's presence had sunk its claws into the air itself. At the stables, the horses shifted and snorted as Sam saddled up, keeping his voice low. "We ride tonight," he said, and Ethan nodded, without asking where. Trust between them had become a quiet, unspoken thing. As the sun dipped and the sky bruised into violet, Sam's mind kept circling the truth. Richard wouldn't stop. He'd use the sheriff if he could, or men in the dark if he couldn't. The Morrison ranch wasn't just land. It was water rights, grazing routes, and a foothold in a territory where power was measured in acres and loyalty in fear. Sam remembered riding those pastures with Anna years ago, her laugh carrying over the wind, and the ache in his chest sharpened. The thought of Richard standing where she once stood, turning her home into a lever for his own gain, was enough to make Sam's jaw lock tight. By the time night wrapped the town in shadows, their mounts were ready, and the road ahead shimmered faintly under the moon. Somewhere beyond the hills lay the ranch, and with it answers Sam wasn't sure he wanted, but couldn't afford to ignore. The air smelled of sage and distance, and he knew they'd have to move fast, because in this game Richard was already playing his next hand. Night had swallowed the last of the town's glow when Sam and Ethan pushed their horses into the dark. The only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the low creak of leather. The air carried that strange, charged stillness of the prairie before a change in the weather. Every rustle in the brush felt amplified, every shadow stretched long and watchful under the moon. Sam kept scanning the horizon, his mind a churn of calculations. Richard wasn't the kind of man to wait. He'd have riders out by dawn, maybe sooner, and every mile they put between themselves and the livery now was worth 10 come daylight. Ethan, though silent, kept glancing over his shoulder, his small frame tense in the saddle. Sam rode closer, enough for the boy to hear without raising his voice. "Once we reach the flats, we cut north. There's an arroyo up ahead the Harpers won't think to look for. It'll give us cover." An hour in, the wind shifted, bringing with it the dry, metallic scent of mesquite fires somewhere behind them. Sam's jaw tightened. Riders. The thought pulled him back to other nights like this, running cattle under threat, skirting posse lines, the constant knowledge that once someone had decided you were theirs to catch, they'd keep hunting until they had you or your hide. He looked at Ethan again and swore under his breath. This wasn't just about outrunning Richard. It was about reaching the Morrison ranch before it was swallowed whole. The moon slid behind a bank of clouds, turning the world ink black except for the ghostly silver of the trail. Every rise and dip in the land became a choice. Stay high for speed or cut low for concealment. Sam chose low. They followed a dry wash, its jagged banks swallowing the sound of their passing until the first stars began to fade in the east. He let the horses drink from a narrow pool, their breath steaming in the pre-dawn chill, and unrolled a strip of jerky for Ethan. "Why does he want the ranch so bad?" the boy finally asked, voice small in the quiet. Sam hesitated. "'Cause owning land out here isn't just owning dirt, it's owning the people who need what's on it. Water, grass, shelter. Your mama's place has all three." Ethan's eyes darkened, the understanding sinking in without further explanation. By morning, they'd reached the flats. Sunlight spread over the horizon in a slow spill, revealing miles of open country and, far in the distance, the low swell of the hills where the Morrison ranch slept. But Sam knew better than to think they'd make it there untouched. A hawk wheeled overhead, its shadow flickering across them, and he had the sudden, cold certainty that Richard's riders were out there too, circling closer with every passing hour. He leaned forward in the saddle, every muscle set for the push ahead. This wasn't just a ride anymore. It was the opening move in a fight he'd been trying to avoid for years. And if Richard thought the Morrison land would fall into his hands without cost, he was about to learn just how stubborn a man could be when the stakes were all he had left. The sun was only a pale smear on the horizon when Sam and Ethan cleared the last of the flats, their horses' hooves striking the hard-packed earth in a steady, relentless cadence. The land ahead rolled toward the Morrison ranch like a great, slow wave of gold and sage, but Sam's gut told him the open ground would be their most dangerous stretch yet. Out here, there were no gullies to duck into, no cottonwoods to shield a rider's silhouette, just the stark truth of two figures cutting across a land where eyes could spot you from miles away. He kept scanning the rear and flanks, watching for the dust plume that would give away Richard's men, and each time the wind shifted, he held his breath, listening for the thrum of other hooves beneath the morning breeze. Ethan rode quiet but taut, his hands clenched on the reins in a way that made his knuckles pale. Sam wanted to tell him it would be all right, but lies were a currency he refused to spend, not with a boy who'd already had enough stolen from him. Instead, he gave him the only thing he could: action. They angled east, following a faint cattle path worn deep enough to sit them lower in the land, hoping it would break their outlines against the sky. The horses responded well, ears twitching, their breath clouding faintly in the cool. By mid-morning, they reached the first fence line of what had once been Morrison land, weathered posts leaning like old men, wire rusting where Anna's father had set it near 20 years ago. Sam dismounted, testing the ground with his boots, and for a moment the air seemed to change. It wasn't just dirt underfoot, it was memory. He could almost hear Anna's voice calling to the hands from the porch, see her skirt lifting in the breeze as she walked out to meet him. That ranch wasn't just a home. It had been a spine of this valley, holding it upright through seasons both cruel and kind. The spell broke with the distant snap of a hawk's cry. Sam glanced up and saw it spiraling, and below, There, far back on the flats, a faint dust smear against the horizon. Too far to pick out riders, but his gut didn't need confirmation. Richard's men had found their trail. He swung back into the saddle, voice low but urgent. "We're close, Ethan. Once we hit the cottonwoods by the creek, we'll have some cover. But we can't stop, not yet." They pushed the horses harder, the ranch's outline beginning to shape itself in the distance. The low rise of the main house roof, the barn's peaked shadow, a windmill's slow, tired turn, catching the sun. From this far, the place looked unchanged, like it had been waiting for them. But Sam knew better. Empty houses out here didn't stay empty. They got claimed, altered, twisted to new purposes. And if Richard had already planted a man or two on the land, riding straight in would be like stepping into the sights of a loaded rifle. By the time they reached the cottonwoods, the sound of the creek was like a pulse beneath the rustle of leaves. Sam slowed only long enough to let the horses drink before guiding them up a narrow deer trail he remembered from years ago. It skirted the northern edge of the property, where the brush grew high and the ground turned soft from seepage. From there, they'd be able to watch the ranch without being seen. They made the ridge just as the noon heat began pressing down, and Sam pulled his horse into the shade of an old oak. Below, the Morrison spread lay still, but not silent. Even at this distance he could make out movement. A horse tied to the post near the front porch, a figure crossing from the barn to the house with a kind of easy gait that said he belonged there, or at least believed he did. Sam felt Ethan lean forward in the saddle beside him. "That's not family," the boy said quietly. Sam nodded, the truth settling like grit in his teeth. Whoever Richard had sent ahead was already making himself at home, and that meant the clock was running out. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to take back what was theirs in spirit, if not on paper. But Sam wasn't about to ride blind into a fight he couldn't win. Not yet. First, he needed to know exactly how many men Richard had here, where they kept themselves, and what they wanted beyond the land itself. Only then could he decide whether to strike like a rattler or slip in like Shadow. Either way, one thing was certain. He and Ethan weren't leaving this valley until the Morrison ranch was out of Harper hands for good. From their vantage point under the oak, Sam kept his eyes fixed on the slow drift of movement below. The lone rider by the porch wasn't alone anymore. Two more had emerged from the barn, one carrying a rifle casually slung across his shoulder, the other leading a sorrel mare with saddlebags that sagged heavy. Even at this distance, the easy way they moved said one thing. They weren't worried. That was bad. Men who didn't keep checking their backs were either careless or they knew no one was close enough to matter. Sam figured it was the latter. He motioned to Ethan to dismount and stay low. They crawled to where a fallen log gave a better view through the brush. The boy's breathing was quick, but steady. Sam felt a grim pride in that. Most kids would have been shaken. Down at the house, the first man stepped onto the porch with a tin cup, leaning in the shade like it was his own front room. A flash of sunlight caught the barrel of the rifle propped just inside the doorway. Sam's mind turned over every option. A frontal ride-in was suicide. Richard's men would have the high ground from the porch, and the open yard between here and the house Might as well have been a killing field. Slipping in at night offered better odds, but he couldn't risk leaving Ethan unguarded in country where every fence post could hide trouble. He needed a third path, one that bought them time, gave them an advantage, and maybe, just maybe, shifted the fight onto ground he chose. He remembered the northern pasture, low-lying, with a split in the creek where one branch curled close to the barn. In the right season, the banks would be high enough to hide a man and horse. If that path was still open, they could get within striking distance of the barn without a shot fired, take one of the guards quiet, and use his position to keep the others pinned. But that meant moving now, before the men inside decided to send one of their own back to Richard with news. As the afternoon heat deepened, Sam saw what he'd been waiting for, a shift change of sorts. One of the men at the barn swung up onto his horse, trotting out toward the fence lines, leaving just two at the heart of the ranch. Fewer eyes. Sam tapped Ethan's arm, voice barely above the hum of cicadas. "We circle wide, keep low in the wash, stay behind me no matter what." The boy nodded, jaw tight, a flicker of something, fear, determination, maybe both, moving in his eyes. They slipped back to the horses and led them down the far slope, hooves muffled in the soft earth. Every step toward that pasture tightened a coil in Sam's chest, because once they moved into position, there'd be no going back. The Morrison ranch wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It had become the line in the sand, and Sam was ready to make damn sure that when the dust settled, it wouldn't be Richard Harper standing on the right side of it. They moved like ghosts through the wash, the muffled splash of hooves in damp earth blending with the rustle of wind through the reeds. The creek's split came into view, a narrow branch curling toward the barn, its banks shadowed by willows whose roots clutched the soil like old fists. Sam dismounted, motioning for Ethan to do the same, and led the horses into the water. The current was shallow but steady, the sound masking their movements as they waded upstream, every step taking them deeper into Morrison land without a soul to mark their passing. From the bank's cover, Sam paused to scan the yard. The two men he'd counted earlier were still there, one seated on the porch rail, idly whittling, the other shifting hay in the barn doorway. Their body language told Sam something important. They weren't expecting trouble from this side. That meant he had a chance. They worked their way along the bend until the creek's high wall placed them almost level with the barn. Sam could smell the hay now, could hear the mare's low nicker from inside. He turned to Ethan, his voice low but steady. "Stay down here till I come back. If you hear shots, ride west. Don't look back." The boy's eyes widened, but he nodded, trusting Sam's word the way you trust a rope in a storm. With the quiet patience of a man who'd tracked wild mustangs, Sam slipped from the creek into the long grass. Each step was measured, every muscle tuned to the rhythm of the guard's movement. At the right moment, he closed the distance, catching the man just as he turned to spit. One sharp blow with the butt of his revolver, and the guard folded to the dirt without a sound. Sam dragged him into the shadows beside the barn, checking the yard again. The man on the porch was still there, whittling away, unaware the tide had just shifted. Sam signaled to Ethan, who scrambled up the bank, leading the horses into the barn shelter. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of leather and feed. a safe pocket for the moment. Sam found a length of rope and bound the unconscious guard's hands, then turned his thoughts to the next move. It was clear now. The ranch could be taken, but it wouldn't be clean. Richard's men would keep coming until someone made it costly enough for them to stop. That meant holding the ground, not just sneaking through it. As the shadows lengthened toward evening, Sam's mind shaped the beginning of a plan, one that would use the land's own bones against its invaders. Outside, the windmill creaked, turning slow in the sunset, and the long, quiet heartbeat of the ranch seemed to stir under Sam's boots. This wasn't just another job, another rescue. This was the stand he'd been walking toward for years, whether he'd known it or not. And now, with Ethan close and the first piece of Richard's hold broken, the fight for the Morrison ranch was about to truly begin. Sam waited in the barn shadows until the sun began to sink, painting the ranch in the kind of gold that made memory feel dangerously close. Outside, the man on the porch yawned, set down his whittling, and sauntered toward the corral for a drink. That was the seam Sam needed. He moved fast, crossing the yard with the silent certainty of a man who'd done this before, his boots barely whispering against the dust. From the far side, Ethan appeared in the dusk, leading their horses to the barn under cover of the rising night. They worked without speaking, Sam cutting the porch man's rifle strap, Ethan holding the reins steady, while Sam secured their prisoner alongside the first one. With the two guards trussed and gagged, they headed for the house. The front door creaked open into a room that smelled faintly of lamp oil and tobacco, but the silence inside told Sam all he needed. No one else here yet. He scanned the place. Anna's table still stood in the corner, scarred from years of use. The stone hearth held cold ashes, but it was intact. This was still the Morrison ranch, but it had been waiting under watch, ready to be claimed by whoever was bold enough to cross the threshold. Tonight, that would be him. They moved quickly through the rooms, securing shutters and setting the lamps low, the way you did when you wanted to see out without being seen in. Sam found an old scattergun in the pantry, oiled but unused, and checked the shells. Still good. Outside, the light died completely, and the land flattened into pure shadow under a rising moon. That was when Sam heard it, the distant, unmistakable rhythm of riders coming fast. Richard's men. He and Ethan took positions. Sam at the window, Ethan crouched by the door with a length of rope, eyes sharp. The sound grew until shapes emerged against the pale dust. 3 riders this time, pulling up at the yard with the confidence of men who thought they were meeting friends. Sam stepped into the doorway, the scattergun leveled in the silver light. "You can tell Richard," he called, voice carrying clean into the night, "that the Morrison ranch is under its own care now. If he wants to test that, he's welcome to try, but he won't like how it ends." The lead rider shifted in the saddle, weighing his odds, then tugged his reins. Without a word, the 3 turned and rode back into the dark, their silhouettes shrinking until the only sound was the creak of the windmill and the soft night chorus of the prairie. Sam lowered the gun, feeling the taut coil in his chest ease just a fraction. Ethan stood beside him, gaze fixed on the empty road, and for the first time since the auction, the boy's shoulders loosened. They were still standing in the eye of the storm. Richard wouldn't let this go. But tonight, they had drawn a line in the dirt and held it. As the wind moved through the cottonwoods, Sam looked out over the land, the barn, the house, all of it bathed in moonlight, and knew this place was theirs again, not just in deed or name, but in heart. Whatever came next, they'd face it from here, together, with the Morrison ranch as both their shelter and their stand.